When everything falls apart, the extraction failing, SEALs pinned down with no hope of survival. That's when legends are born. The military's most elite warriors found themselves trapped, abandoned, counting their final breaths as enemy fire closed in from all sides. Then through the smoke rose an Apache helicopter piloted by someone they'd all dismissed, someone they'd overlooked, someone they'd never truly seen until this moment. What she did next wasn't just combat flying. It was impossible. It was apocalyptic. It was the birth of a name whispered with awe across battlefields for years to come. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If you appreciate stories about the extraordinary people hiding in plain sight, consider subscribing for more tales of those who never seek recognition but deserve it most. The tactical operations center hummed with the controlled energy that preceded high-risk missions. Maps of the Karingal Valley stretched across digital displays marked with red indicators representing Taliban strongholds. The air smelled of coffee and the particular tension that came before sending men into danger. Major Call Thorne's voice carried authority across the room. Gentlemen, this HVT extraction is time-sensitive. Intelligence confirms Malik Zawar will be at this compound for only a 12-hour window. Lieutenant Commander Briggs and his SEAL team leaned forward, memorizing every contour of the terrain. In the corner, partially obscured by support staff, sat Flight Officer Astria Durov. Her call sign Valkyrie was stitched on her flight suit, though the threads had begun to fray. Her focus remained on the topographical map, fingers tracing ridge lines others had overlooked. "Sir," she said, voice quiet but precise. "This ravine creates a natural funnel. If compromised, it's an ideal ambush point." Briggs glanced over, his expression a mixture of impatience and dismissal. "Thanks for the geography lesson, standby pilot." A few SEALs chuckled. Colonel Ridgway entered, commanding immediate attention. "Captain Lucian Mercer will lead air support with Apache Squadron Delta." Approving nods circulated. Mercer's reputation preceded him. 3 tours, distinguished flying cross, the kind of pilot they made recruitment videos about. Flight Officer Durov will remain on standby at FOB. Ridgway continued without making eye contact with her. Emergency backup only. Astria's expression remained neutral as she made a slight adjustment to her notes. If the dismissal bothered her, she showed no sign. She had long since learned to operate within the constraints of others' perceptions. After the briefing disbanded, Astria methodically collected her materials. Captain Mercer approached, his confident swagger unmistakable. "Dav," he acknowledged with a nod. "Sorry about the bench warming. Maybe next time." She met his eyes evenly. "Fly safe, Captain." Later, in her sparse quarters, Astria reviewed mission parameters alone. The small room contained few personal effects, military efficiency rather than aesthetic choice. When someone knocked, she quickly slid a worn photo beneath her flight notes, her younger self at flight school graduation, standing first in her class, and closed a small wooden box containing a medal rarely spoken about. "Enter," she called. A young communication specialist handed her an updated weather report. "Lat meteorological data, ma'am. Thought you might want it, even though you're not flying." "Thank you, specialist. Preparation matters regardless of assignment." After he left, Astria carefully studied the wind patterns predicted for the operation window. She made notations on potential visibility challenges and crosswind calculations. Work no one had asked for, but she completed anyway. Outside her door, 2 passing officers lowered their voices, unaware she could hear every word through the thin walls. "Durov, wasn't she involved in that classified operation in Kandahar? That file sealed tighter than the Pentagon. All I know is she was transferred here after something went sideways. Heard a general lost his stars over it. Whatever happened, they buried it and her career with it." Their footsteps faded down the corridor, leaving Astria alone with the weight of unspoken history. Dusk painted the mountains in blood-orange hues as the mission launched. Blackhawks delivered the SEAL team, while Captain Mercer's Apache squadron established overwatch patterns above. The operation had begun with textbook precision, each element moving according to the carefully orchestrated plan. From the FOB Communication Center, Astria monitored radio traffic, eyes never leaving the tactical display. Something in the enemy movement patterns troubled her. Subtle coordinated shifts that diverged from intelligence predictions. "Sir," she addressed the duty officer, "have we verified recent satellite imagery of these eastern approaches? Enemy movements suggest preparation rather than reaction." The officer barely glanced at her. "Mercer has eyes on target. He reports normal activity." Astria nodded, but continued her analysis. Years of combat flying had taught her to recognize the signatures of an ambush forming like subtle pressure changes before a storm. The first indication of trouble came 40 minutes in. "Contact multiple hostiles," crackled Briggs' voice. More than expected, moving to secure the HVD. Minutes later, chaos erupted. "Ambush. We're taking fire from all sides." Another voice broke through. "RPG teams on the ridge." Mercer squadron engaged, but the radio soon filled with their own distress calls. "Taking heavy fire. Port engine hit. This is Mercer. We're withdrawing to safe distance. Cannot maintain position. Communications deteriorated into fragments. We're pinned down. 3 men down. No extraction point visible." Colonel Ridgway stormed into the command center, demanding situation reports as the tactical display showed the operation disintegrating. Red indicators multiplied across the screen surrounding the blue dots representing the SEAL team. "What's our extraction plan?" Ridgway demanded. "Air assets compromised, sir. Blackhawks can't approach without Apache cover." Ridgway's face hardened as he assessed the tactical display. "All air assets compromised. We need to wait for QRF from Bram." "That's 2 hours minimum," a staff officer noted. Astria approached the command table. "Sir, I've identified a pattern in their jamming tech. I can punch through it and create an extraction corridor." Ridgway barely glanced at her. "Stand down, flight officer. We wait for proper reinforcement." A desperate transmission cut through. "We're not going to last 20 minutes. Ammo critical." The command center fell silent, the weight of impending loss hanging heavy in the air. Ridgway turned away, already mentally composing condolence letters. Without another word, Astria walked out. Ridgway noticed too late. "DAV, stand down." "That's an order." The door closed behind her. At the airfield, mechanics watched in shock as she single-handedly prepared her Apache, performing pre-flight checks with methodical precision. Her movements were economical, practiced, the routine of thousands of flight hours condensed into urgent efficiency. "Flight officer, you are not cleared for takeoff," shouted the tower controller through a handheld radio. She continued her preparations, checking weapon systems and engine parameters with unwavering focus. Technical Sergeant Lockcatch rushed to her side, helping secure her helmet. He spoke quickly, quietly. "I was at Kandahar. They never knew what you did." She paused, meeting his eyes for just a moment. "Give him hell, Valkyrie," he said, stepping back as rotors began to turn. The Apache lifted smoothly, hovering momentarily before banking sharply toward the mountains. Behind her, the tower erupted in confusion, orders countermanded by the reality of her departure. In the ravine Astria had identified hours earlier, Briggs applied pressure to his point man's chest wound. Blood seeped between his fingers despite the quick clot. Around them, the remnants of his SEAL team established a shrinking perimeter. Ammunition counters approaching 0. "Command, this is Bravo 6. We are combat ineffective. Repeat, combat ineffective. Enemy closing from all sides." His voice remained steady despite the finality of his words. Through the smoke of burning vehicles and impact craters, they heard it. The distinctive of an Apache's rotors. Not retreating, but approaching. "Who the hell is that?" muttered Briggs, squinting upward. Through a break in the smoke, a single Apache attack helicopter descended into the valley alone. No wingman, no support, just one aircraft against what intelligence now estimated as a battalion-strength enemy force. The helicopter's side came into view, revealing the call sign Valkyrie. "The standby?" A wounded SEAL asked in disbelief. That desk jockey from the briefing. What followed defied explanation. The Apache moved with impossible precision. Not just good piloting, but something approaching mathematical perfection. Every maneuver calculated to within inches. Every burst of a 30mm chain gun finding multiple targets with surgical accuracy. Enemy positions that had pinned down the SEALs for over an hour vanished in cascading explosions. Rockets struck command posts they hadn't even identified. The Apache seemed to anticipate ambush positions before they revealed themselves. A hardened SEAL team leader watched, transfixed. "I've never seen anything like this." The radio, silent for so long, suddenly carried Astria's calm voice. "Bravo 6, this is Valkyrie forming extraction corridor, southeast to northwest. You have 90 seconds to move your wounded." No emotion, no drama, just clinical precision. As they gathered their wounded, a Taliban heavy weapons team appeared on a ridge line above. A perfect firing position on both the SEALs and the Apache. Before anyone could even shout a warning, Astria executed a maneuver flight instructor specifically warned against, inverting the Apache at low altitude to fire upward, eliminating the threat in a move that should have crashed the helicopter. "Sweet mercy," whispered Briggs as she created their escape route. The SEALs began moving their wounded toward the designated extraction point. Enemy fire decreased dramatically as Taliban fighters shifted from offense to survival, many abandoning positions rather than face the precision destruction raining from above. Later, intelligence would recover a Taliban communication. A commander's panicked voice saying, "It's her. The ghost of Kandahar is here." As a second helicopter arrived for medical evacuation, the SEALs watched their guardian angel continue her methodical destruction of enemy forces. Not in rage or revenge, but with the detached precision of someone solving a complex equation. When the last SEAL was aboard the evacuation helicopter, Astria's voice came through once more. Bravo 6 extracted, returning to base. They watched her Apache bank away, weapon systems finally silent. As their own helicopter lifted off, Briggs kept his eyes on the lone aircraft until distance swallowed it from view. The FOB landing pad swarmed with medical teams as the evacuation helicopter touched down with the wounded SEALs. Minutes later, Astria's Apache appeared on the horizon, rotors still spinning, but its ammunition completely expended. Even from a distance, observers could see battle damage across its fuselage, evidence of the gauntlet she had flown through. She executed a textbook landing and began shutdown procedures with the same methodical care she'd shown in combat. No celebration, no acknowledgement of what she'd just accomplished, just a pilot completing her mission. As she ran through final checks, ground crew approached with hesitant reverence, examining the multiple impact marks on the aircraft skin. One technician counted silently, reaching 14 before stopping in disbelief. By all reasonable assessment, the helicopter should not have remained airworthy with such damage. Colonel Ridgway marched across the tarmac, face flushed with anger at the disobeyed order. His stride projected authority and consequence. A commanding officer prepared to enforce discipline regardless of outcome. Before he could reach her, Briggs intercepted him, still covered in blood and dirt from the battlefield. Despite his exhaustion, the SEAL commander positioned himself firmly between Ridgway and Astria. "Sir, we need to talk about what we just witnessed." Their conversation happened at a distance from the others. Briggs gestured emphatically, pointing back toward the mountains, then at Astria, then at a tablet displaying classified files he demanded to see. Though the words couldn't be heard, the intensity was unmistakable. At one point, Briggs handed Ridgway the tablet, forcing him to review something that made the colonel's expression shift. Ridgway's transformation was subtle but profound, anger giving way to confusion, then disbelief. As he reviewed the documents, he looked up at Astria, then back to the tablet, his military bearing momentarily abandoned in genuine shock. Meanwhile, Astria walked alone toward her quarters, helmet under arm, not seeking recognition or acknowledgement. Her gait betrayed no exhaustion despite the physical and mental demands of what she'd just accomplished. If anything, She seemed more at peace than she had during the mission briefing, as if returning to the sky, even under such circumstances, had restored something long missing. Several officers moved to intercept her, but something in her demeanor made them reconsider. Questions would wait, reports would be filed, consequences would follow. But for now, she had earned whatever solitude she sought. In her quarters, Astria methodically removed her flight gear. Each piece was placed with precision, habits formed through years of discipline. Only when everything was properly stowed did she allow herself to sit on the edge of her bed, hands finally revealing a slight tremor. From her footlocker, she retrieved a small flask and took a measured sip. Not celebration, merely medicine for the inevitable crash of adrenaline. As she recapped it, her gaze fell on the photograph she'd hidden earlier. Her younger self at graduation, full of promise and purpose. Without expression, she slid it back beneath her notes. A knock interrupted her ritual. She composed herself before answering. Technical Sergeant Locke stood outside, his expression a complex mixture of concern and admiration. "Medical wants to check you out." "I'm fine," she replied. "Standard protocol after combat missions," he countered gently. "Especially ones where you take 14 hits and pull maneuvers that aren't supposed to be possible." She nodded once, accepting the logic, if not the concern behind it. As they walked toward the medical building, Locke spoke quietly. "What you did out there, what you did at Kandahar too. They can file all the reprimands they want, but those men are alive because of you." Astria maintained her forward gaze. "I was simply performing my duty, Sergeant." "Is that what they called it when they buried you here? Duty?" She stopped, turning to him with rare directness. "We don't always get to choose how we serve, only that we do." Later that evening, the surviving SEALs gathered in the mess hall, the atmosphere subdued but alive with an energy that follows brushes with death. They occupied a corner table, speaking in low tones that occasionally broke into cathartic laughter. Men processing their survival through fragmented recollections of a day that should have been their last. When Astria entered to get coffee, conversation ceased, not just at the SEAL table, but across the entire room. She felt their eyes, but kept her gaze forward, prepared for the usual isolation that followed her reputation. She moved with practiced indifference toward the coffee station, her posture military perfect despite the day's exertions. The routine was familiar. Enter, become invisible. Exit without engagement. Instead, Briggs stood, raising his cup in the traditional SEAL salute. "Hooyah!" And the entire room followed, even Colonel Ridgway at the officers' table. For the first time, Astria's composure faltered slightly. Something flashed across her features. Surprise, perhaps even vulnerability, before being carefully contained. She nodded once, acknowledging their respect, before quietly taking her coffee and departing. But the moment marked a shift. Whatever had been sealed away in classified files, whatever had followed her from Kandahar, had been temporarily suspended in the undeniable reality of lives saved. In the command center later that night, Ridgway sat alone reviewing footage captured by surveillance drones during the extraction. He repeatedly replayed sequences of Astria's Apache performing maneuvers that defied conventional flight parameters. At one point, he paused on an image of the helicopter threading between two cliff faces with mere feet of clearance on either side while simultaneously engaging multiple targets. The timestamps confirmed what seemed impossible. The entire sequence had taken less than 4 seconds. A senior intelligence officer entered carrying a sealed folder. "You requested the Kandahar files, sir." Ridgway accepted the folder with appropriate reverence for its classification level. Only the portions relevant to Flight Officer Durov. "Sir, those portions represent approximately 80% of the file." The colonel's eyebrows raised slightly as he opened the folder. His expression grew increasingly troubled as he read, occasionally glancing at the frozen image on the screen. "This confirms it," he finally said. "She was the pilot on Operation Nightshade." "Yes, sir." Though, officially, that operation never existed. Ridgway continued reading, his military bearing gradually giving way to something approaching genuine emotional response. When he finished, He closed the folder carefully. How many lives? He asked. 38 extracted successfully. 4 helicopters shot down. Dovs was the only one to return, and they buried her for it. They needed someone to blame for the intelligence failure, sir. It couldn't be the general. Ridgway nodded slowly, understanding the political calculus that had sacrificed a pilot's career to preserve a general's stars. Have new orders drawn up for Flight Officer Durov. I'll sign them in the morning. Sir, she doesn't belong here, Lieutenant. Never did. The following morning, Astria reported as ordered to Colonel Ridgway's office, prepared for disciplinary action. Her uniform was immaculate, her expression neutral. A soldier ready to accept consequences. Instead, she found Briggs already seated across from the colonel. Both men stood when she entered. Flight Officer Dov. Ridgway began formally, then softened slightly. Please sit. She remained standing. I prefer to receive my reprimanded attention, sir. This isn't a reprimand, Ridgway replied, gesturing again to the chair. Please. Reluctantly, she sat, maintaining perfect posture. I've reviewed the mission logs from yesterday's operation, Ridgway began. And I've also reviewed certain classified files pertaining to your previous assignment. Astria's expression remained carefully neutral, though a subtle tension appeared in her shoulders. I owe you an apology, Ridgway continued, both personally and on behalf of command. The admission clearly surprised her, though she contained it quickly. Sir, what happened at Kandahar was not your fault. The intelligence was flawed. The mission parameters impossible and the extraction plan inadequate. That you managed to save anyone at all was nothing short of miraculous. Briggs leaned forward. And yesterday was no different. Without your intervention, my entire team would have been lost. Astria absorbed their words without visible reaction. Years of practice at containing emotion serving her well. Thank you for saying so, sir, but I disobeyed a direct order. Yes, Ridgway acknowledged. And in doing so, you upheld the highest traditions of service. Sometimes duty requires difficult choices. He slid a folder across the desk. These are your new orders. Effective immediately, you're being reassigned. She opened the folder, scanning the contents with practiced efficiency. Only a slight widening of her eyes betrayed her surprise. Jint Special Operations Air Command, she questioned, looking up. They specifically requested you, Briggs explained. Seems your reputation precedes you after all. But my record, the Kandahar incident, has been re-evaluated in light of recently declassified information. Ridgway finished for her. Sometimes the system gets it wrong, flight officer. This time we're getting it right. For the first time since they'd known her, something approaching a genuine smile touched Astria's features. Not broad or demonstrative, but authentic. A crack in carefully maintained armor. When do I report, sir? Transport leaves tomorrow at 0800. Your Apache is being repaired and will follow once it's flight-worthy again. She nodded, absorbing the rapid change in circumstances. Permission to speak freely, sir? Granted. Why now? What changed? Ridgway and Briggs exchanged glances before the colonel answered. Yesterday, you demonstrated what we in the military sometimes forget. That true excellence isn't about following orders blindly, but about fulfilling our core mission, bringing our people home, Briggs added. And some of us made enough noise that the right people finally listened. Astria stood, resuming her military bearing. Thank you, sir. I'll prepare for transfer immediately. As she turned to leave, Ridgway added, Valkyrie. She paused at the use of her call sign. Whatever happened before, whatever they said about you, remember this. Yesterday, you wrote your own record, and it speaks for itself. She nodded once before departing, her stride marginally lighter than when she had entered. Behind her, Briggs turned to Ridgway. You think Jacket knows what they're getting? The colonel smiled slightly. No, but they're about to find out. 3 weeks passed like a gentle exhale after years of held breath. Astria packed her sparse belongings into a standard-issue duffel bag. Each item meticulously folded and placed with a precision that defined every aspect of her life. The small room that had been her assigned quarters for the past 18 months now stood nearly empty, revealing the impersonal nature of her existence here. New orders had arrived that morning, transferred to a classified special operations unit that officially didn't exist. The paperwork bore the signatures of officers far above Colonel Ridgway's pay grade, suggesting intervention from echelons she had assumed had forgotten her existence. She paused at her desk, running a finger along its surface. Unlike many pilots who adorned their spaces with photographs, mementos, or lucky talismans, Astria had kept nothing visible. Her memories remained internal, her totems hidden from casual observation. From the small drawer, she retrieved the worn photograph of her graduation and the wooden box containing her medal. For the first time in months, she opened the box, examining the distinguished flying cross nestled inside. The citation that accompanied it had been classified, the ceremony private. Only she and those who had been at Kandahar knew what it represented. A knock at her door interrupted her reflection. "Enter," she called, closing the metal box and returning it to her bag. Technical Sergeant Locke stood in the doorway, holding a wooden box larger than her metal case. His expression carried a mixture of respect and something approaching affection, the closest thing to friendship she had experienced at this posting. "The maintenance crew wanted you to have this," he said, extending the box toward her. Inside was her Apache's nose art, carefully removed and preserved. Valkyrie in bold letters, now accompanied by 8 new hash marks that hadn't been there before the extraction mission. "They added these," Locke said, pointing to the marks. "One for each life you saved that day." "Should be more," she replied quietly, running her fingertips over the painted metal. "They ran out of space," he smiled, then hesitated. "What you did at Kandahar, and here people should know." She closed the box carefully. "Some stories aren't meant for telling, Sergeant." "Maybe not the details, but the meaning behind them," he persisted. "You know what they're calling you now. Not just here, but across 3 FOBs." She raised an eyebrow in question. "The ghost of Kandahar," he said. "Word travels fast when someone does the impossible twice." Before she could respond, Lieutenant Commander Briggs appeared at her doorway, more formal than she'd ever seen him. Gone was the dismissive SEAL team leader. In his place stood a commander with a deeper understanding of the woman before him. "Flight officer," he acknowledged with a nod. "May I enter?" Locke excused himself with a respectful nod to them both, leaving Astria alone with the man whose team she had saved. "I looked up your file," Briggs began without preamble. "Or what's left of it. Kandahar wasn't your fault." They were wrong. Her eyes met his, evaluating the sincerity. After a lifetime of careful self-containment, Astria had become expert at reading others while revealing nothing herself. 38 soldiers came home because of what I did," she finally said. "The brass couldn't handle how I did it. Breaking protocols, ignoring direct orders." A faint smile. "Sound familiar?" "They buried you to hide their own failures," Briggs said. "But we don't forget our own." The simple statement, "we don't forget our own," carried weight beyond its words. In a military career defined by isolation, first by her exceptional abilities and later by official censure, the inclusion represented something she had not expected to find here. "Your new assignment," Briggs continued. "It's with Colonel Tyrannies' unit, isn't it?" She tilted her head slightly. "That information is classified, Commander." "Which is all the confirmation I need," he replied with a slight smile. "Tyrannies only recruits the best and the most unorthodox. You know him? We've crossed paths. He has an unusual approach to military doctrine. Meaning he cares more about results than regulations." Briggs clarified. "You'll fit right in." For the first time in their acquaintance, Astria allowed herself a genuine smile. Not broad or demonstrative, but authentic. "I should finish packing," she said. "Transport leaves at 0800. Briggs nodded. "My team would like to see you off if that's acceptable." She considered this unexpected courtesy. "That won't be necessary." "It's not about necessity, Darov. It's about respect." At the airfield the next morning, a transport helicopter waited to take her to her new assignment. The rising sun cast long shadows across the tarmac. The mountains beyond still shrouded in pre-dawn darkness. Astria approached the helicopter alone, duffel bag over one shoulder, wooden box containing her nose art tucked under her arm. To her surprise, the entire SEAL team stood in formation nearby. Not just Briggs and his immediate team, but everyone who had been involved in the extraction mission, even those who had been wounded and were still recovering. As she approached, Briggs called them to attention. As one, they rendered a silent salute, the highest honor they could bestow. She returned it crisply before boarding, her expression professional as always, but her eyes revealing something rarely seen: emotion. The helicopter lifted off, banking toward an undisclosed location and a future that perhaps for the first time in years held promise rather than exile. On the ground, a group of newly arrived pilots watched the departure. "Who was that?" one asked. Another answered with reverence, usually reserved for legends. "That's Valkyrie." "What did she do?" The first inquired. "If you have to ask, your clearance isn't high enough to know." 6 months later, at a classified forward operating base near the Afghanistan-Pakistan border, Colonel Tirani studied mission parameters for an extraction deemed nearly impossible by conventional analysis. For CIA operatives had been compromised deep in territory controlled by forces far more sophisticated than standard Taliban militants. "Conventional approach is suicide," his operations officer stated flatly. "Area is too hot. Too many advanced anti-aircraft systems. No viable corridors." Tirani's nodded thoughtfully, then keyed his intercom. "Send in Valkyrie." Moments later, Astria entered, her flight suit now bearing the insignia of the classified unit. The past 6 months had changed her subtly, not her discipline or precision, but her bearing. She moved with the confidence of someone operating in her natural environment among those who understood her capabilities. "You've reviewed the parameters?" Tirani's asked without preamble. "Yes, sir. Extraction is possible." The operations officer scoffed. "Every simulation says otherwise." Astria glanced at him briefly before returning her attention to Tirani's. "Simulations have limitations, sir." "Explain your approach," Tirani's instructed, ignoring the operations officer's discomfort. She stepped forward, manipulating the tactical display with quick, decisive movements. "We insert at extreme low altitude along this ridgeline. It masks our approach from their radar installations here and here. That puts you within range of their ground forces for over 20 kilometers." The operations officer objected. "Yes," she acknowledged without elaboration. "And the extraction itself," Tirani's prompted. "For minutes on the ground maximum. We'll need 2 aircraft, one to suppress and one to extract." "Who flies the second aircraft?" "I fly alone," she stated flatly. "Lieutenant Vale can handle the extraction while I provide cover." Tirani's studied her for a long moment. "You're suggesting you solo pilot an Apache into the heaviest concentration of anti-aircraft systems we've seen in 5 years, while simultaneously providing sufficient suppression for an extraction?" "Yes, sir." The operations officer shook his head. "Colonel, this is beyond unorthodox." "It's approved," Tirani's interrupted. "Prepare your aircraft, flight officer." After Astria departed, the operations officer turned to Tirani's in disbelief. "Sir, with all due respect, we're sending her to her death." Tirani smiled slightly. "That's what they said at Kandahar." He pulled a classified file from his desk, and again during that extraction in the Kringle. He tapped the file thoughtfully. "There's a reason they call her the Ghost Major, sir, because what she does shouldn't be possible. And yet here we are." Under the cover of darkness that night, 2 Apache helicopters lifted off. In the lead aircraft sat Astria alone in a cockpit designed for 2 systems modified to allow single pilot operation. Her expression carried the same focused concentration it always did before missions, but now without the shadow of doubt that had followed her since Kandahar. As they approached the target area, Lieutenant Vale's voice came through her headset. 5 minutes to insertion point." "Sure you don't want me to take point, Valkyrie?" "Negative," she replied calmly. "Maintain formation. Follow my lead." They descended to treetop level, the terrain racing beneath them at blistering speed. Warning systems blared as enemy radar attempted to lock on, but Astria's route kept them just below effective tracking range. When they reached the extraction point, chaos erupted just as it had in the Kringle Valley months earlier. But this time, Astria wasn't intervening in a deteriorating situation. She was executing a plan specifically designed around her unique capabilities. Her Apache moved with the same impossible precision, engaging multiple targets simultaneously while maintaining protective coverage over the extraction zone. Lieutenant Vale, witnessing her performance firsthand for the first time, could only focus on his own role in the mission, trusting in abilities that defied conventional explanation. 4 minutes later, all 4 CIA operatives were secured aboard Vale's aircraft. Valkyrie, we're clear. Fall back to Rendezvous Point. Acknowledged, she responded, continuing her suppression fire. Go. I'll cover your exit. As Vale's helicopter lifted off, Astria executed a final sweep of the area, ensuring their escape corridor remained clear. Only when the extraction aircraft had reached safe distance did she bank sharply and follow. Behind her, enemy forces recovered enough to launch missiles, but too late to find their mark. The ghost of Kandahar had already vanished into the night, leaving only destruction and whispered legends in her wake. Back at base, as the CIA operatives were debriefed and Vale submitted his mission report, Tyrannis found Astria in the hangar, methodically inspecting her aircraft for damage. 4 out of 4, he noted. Mission success. She nodded without looking up from her inspection. Aircraft took minimal damage. Should be operational again by tomorrow. I wasn't talking about the helicopter. She paused, finally meeting his gaze. I was told you don't fly for recognition. He said that you only fly for the mission. That's correct, sir. Tyrannis smiled slightly. Good, because where we're going next, there won't be anyone to witness what you do except those you save. He handed her a sealed folder. Preliminary briefing. We deploy in 3 days. As he walked away, Astria allowed herself a moment to reflect on the journey from exile to purpose. From the lone standby pilot no one wanted to the ghost that everyone requested, from buried to essential. She opened the folder and began studying the contents, already calculating approaches and extraction angles in her mind. The past was sealed in classified files, but the future opened before her like the sky itself. Subscribe to The Ordinary Heroes.